Hey everyone, made Last Boss back from the void to give you a Baku-Tech competitive tier list. Um, I have done a couple of these before in the past, but this time I wanted to do one in video format, uh, just because A, I haven't posted on this channel in fuck knows how long. Um, B, it gives me an opportunity to kind of explain my rankings, and C, because you guys really liked my personal rankings video, and I thought this would be like a pretty similar. Before we start, there are a couple of things I need to mention and get out of the way. First of all, the qualifier for this list, it had Bakugan had to have been released under Tech or Armors. So that includes all these guys who are non-Tech exclusives. And we're going to be treating the G power cap as 800. If you didn't know, throughout Bakugan's life in Japan, there was a G power cap, and you were allowed to use any Bakugan that was under the G power cap, including ones that were sold internationally. So ones that we got in the West, if they were imported over, you were allowed to use them as long as they were under the G power cap. The last updated G power cap I can find on archives of the Japanese Bakugan website was the change from 750 to 950. But from what I understand, it was lowered after that. I just don't know what it was lowered to, but 800 seems fair considering that the highest G power printing in Japan was 770. Kai Bakugan and other Bakugan that have variations similar to that will be treated as different Bakugan. So even though like the red Trifalco isn't a Kai Bakugan, it does have a pretty significant molding difference. So we will treat it as a different Bakugan. Same with like the Spine Bakugan, Go Dragoon, and the Gaga Garyu. We're going to be looking at those as if they're the plastic versions, because I feel like those are a good bit different than the regular versions. G power and attribute variations, I'm just going to not worry about that. It'll be part of being built optimally. So yeah, I feel like if I did every G power variation and every attribute variation, there'd just be way too much. Similar situation with binds combinations and armors combinations. I'm not going to be looking at most of those because it would just be way too much. There is a handful of extra bind combinations I threw in here, mainly the ones that were released that way. So we have Bujin Dragoon, the God 3 deck. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's everything I need to get out of the way. I don't know, probably forgot something, but whatever. We'll just get right into it. Starting with Flare Dragoon, the poster boy for Tech. And I'm gonna put him in B tier. Flare Dragoon, he's a very baseline Bakugan. In terms of attack, he's like baseline attack. He's not that impressive, uh, but he does do a bit better considering that he has Dragoon and Pyrus support. Um, you get a couple of variations now you want to build him since he has both Cross and Soul. Generally, for a straight shot attacker, you would build him with just a metal cross. And if you wanted to build him for curve shots, you could build him with full metal. It is important to note that you are allowed to change convert parts with other Bakugan on your deck during the game. So depending on what your other Bakugan are, you don't have to commit to specifically to a certain build. So it's nice to just kind of have the options. Yeah, B tier's fair. Destroy Minikis is essentially the same Bakugan. You get the same kind of build variations that you get with Dragoon. Both of these have a 700G printing, which is pretty solid. The main difference is that obviously Minikis is Darkest, which is also a really good element, attribute, whatever. And it's has access to Minikis support and Savage Ground support, which is also really good. But again, there are Bakugan that were released after this that are a lot better. Uh, Also, some that were a lot worse. So yeah, definitely baseline Bakugan. Keelan Leonis, I'm gonna put in B tier as well. I think this is the only of the original four Baku-Tech Bakugan that didn't get a 700G printing. I could be wrong. Even if it did, I don't think it would change its placement. Um, you get a couple of build variations with Keelan Leonis. You can either build it as a attack defense hybrid, um, with full metal or just the one metal cross because that's all it has, or you can build it full on defense with a rubber cross. So again, it's nice to have some build variations. The main thing with Keelan Leonis is just Shield Leonis is such a strong much. It's just this. It's just Keelan Leonis, but significantly better. And while the other background did get upgrades, they weren't like there might have still been like some incentive to use these ones over their evolutions, depending on supports or build variations that you have access to. When it comes to Shield Leonis, or Keelan Leonis, I mean, Shield Leonis is just such a strict upgrade that I don't feel comfortable putting it any higher than Keelan Leonis higher than B. But like on its own, Keelan Leonis is still a solid tank. Van Falco. This is a utility Bakugan. Uh, None of its stats are very impressive. It has okay attack, um, no defense. But the main reason you use this thing is because it can jump and it lets you access hard to reach cards, which is actually pretty relevant. It's a very common strategy to place gate cards to block your opponent from standing on Bakugan, or not standing on Bakugan, getting double stands on other cards. Um, so yeah, getting to those hard to reach spots is pretty useful. I just feel like there's other utility Bakugan that were released later, that were better, and some that were worse. Yeah, Van Falco is in B tier. It also has a 700G printing. Moving on to these guys, I'm gonna do them all at once because they're very similar. I'm gonna put all these guys: Delta Dragonoid, Vanderus, Alpha Hydronoid, and Infinity Dragonoid. I'm gonna put them all in C tier. In previous lists, I put them in D tier, but I feel like I was being a little too strict with C tier in those lists. The thing with these guys is that they are a bit better than like a typical Bakugan, but not like enough to keep up with most of tech. Like the metal is nice, but it's not enough to keep up with the competition. The main thing that separates these guys from a lot of other Bakugan is that because they were released in the West, they have a lot of attribute variations. Um, I think Delta Dragonoid has the least, since its only other B2 attribute variation is Chaos. Um, but the others all have a pretty wide range. Um, and most tech Bakugan only come in one attribute, so even though these guys aren't great Bakugan themselves, it's nice that you can have that attribute variation while not being a completely worthless Bakugan. Like these guys still have the metal, they still got something going for them. So I feel like they're C tier, probably like a low C tier, but still C tier. Mystic Alico is F tier. The way I was kind of putting the list, I was thinking D tier around the range of what like a typical Bakugan released in the West would be. So something like a Percival or a Neo Dragonoid, right? So F tier is something even worse than that, and Mystic Alico is definitely worse than a typical Bakugan. For starters, it doesn't have anything attack or defense oriented going for it. In fact, it has really bad defense, below average defense in terms of typical Bakugan. Just because of the way it opens, it just makes it a big target. Um, but the main thing that really screws it over is the dice. Any amount of randomness is going to be a downside to Bakugan. Um, and in Mystic Eliko's case, it's already a bad Bakugan, and then it has another negative on top of that. The Any legal version of the dice is going to be too low to use in regular power battles, but too high to use in low G power battles outside of like one side. But if you want to use it for low G power battles, you literally have to roll the dice to have it even work. Um, so there's not a lot of strategies that you can really use Mystic Eliko in, and the ones you can't use it consistently. It's just a really, really bad Bakugan overall. Reyes 2, we're going to put in D tier. Um, it's about the same level as what you'd expect from a typical Bakugan non-tech. Um, it is a bit better though because it is double-sided, which gives it a bit more. It makes it a bit easier to stand with. There are other double-sided Bakugan, and I think Braze 2 utilizes double-sided the best, but that's because the other double-sided Bakugan have like one really good side and then another side that's like really bad, so it functions more as a nerf. When it comes to Brace 2, both sides are equally bad, so it just kind of doesn't matter which side you land on. Um, so yeah, you just kind of it's just a typical Bakugan. That's a bit easier to stand with. So like high D tier, I guess is where I would consider that. Orbit Helios is also going to go in D tier. This is essentially just a typical Bakugan, with a flashy gimmick. Um, it's just flashy. The spinning doesn't really do anything. You could argue that it helps deflect attacks and helps defensively, but really, not really. Yeah, not really. It's just not very useful. Yeah, he's just a typical Bakugan with a flashy gimmick. Yeah, that's it. Uh, Skytress and Jackor, I'm going to do both of these guys at the same time. These guys are both easily F tier. These are the two worst Bakugan in tech. The problem with these guys are obvious. They're Sky Raiders. Um, and that just means that whenever you're going to try to stand with them, you're much more likely for them to just jump off the card and not stand anywhere. And a Bakugan you can't even stand with is useless. So yeah, I'd say Jackor is a bit better just because its ball form is a bit more round. But regardless, I'd never use either of these. Um, Given the opportunity, I'd never use either of these, just ever. Grand Panzer, we're gonna put in C tier. Um, Grand Panzer is just, I don't know. It's a bit ruined by its built-in metal. It would be a lot better if it just had soul parts. But the built-in metal means you're essentially locked to running this thing as curve shot utility. And overall, like, there's a lot better options. Um, it doesn't have any attack, and in terms of defense, it's pretty bad. It's not super tall, but it's a little tall, and it has no supports keeping it standing, so it's really easy to knock over. It's it has a couple of redeeming qualities though. First of all, it's low occupancy. Um, there are scenarios where you want low occupancy Bakugan, and in that case, Grand Panzer isn't a bad choice. Um, Although with low occupancy, I like them to do something else. Another thing with Grand Panzer is that it has a 700G printing, so it does have solid G power, but those are really the only two things that it's going for it. And so I feel like C tier is where it belongs. Dio Sivak, we're gonna put in A tier. This guy's main thing is that he's really well balanced and pretty heavy. Um, he has the two cross parts, obviously, but he also has the metal mandibles, and he carries Savik around with him, which is just a big metal weight. So he ends up having pretty good weight. Um, but on top of that, he can also be a he can kind of be a G power battler. Um, his main thing is attack, but it's nice that he has the little dice that can give him the extra G power boost. I think with optimal printings, he can reach 920, which is quite high, and he has a lot of support cards to help with that. Um, so yeah, the G power battling is just kind of like icing on the cake of an already good attacker. But the main thing that's putting him in A tier is his really solid attack. Saint Aquas. This one's kind of a weird one. Saint Aquas's main thing is that he's a hybrid attack defense Bakugan. And he's not a bad hybrid Bakugan. Previous lists, I put him in A tier. I'm actually going to bump him down to B tier. I just feel I don't like hybrid Bakugan as much now as I used to. I just feel like the existence of Jigen Dragoon just ruins most of them. It doesn't. There's no incentive to run Saint Aquas when there's actually when Jigen Dragoon is just such a good Bakugan in attack and defense. While Saint Aquas is just kind of like mid attack and defense, and it can do both. Yeah, it's still okay. I just don't think it's A tier anymore. Bland Schult. I'm gonna put in B tier. Um, Bland Schult has a lot going for him. For one, he has 3 cross parts, and cross parts are better than Soul, um, just because they usually don't make you as unbalanced. Bland Schult with full metal is a little unbalanced, but not enough to like really ruin it. Um, Generally, when you have a background with 2 cross, 2 soul, if you run full metal, it's a little too unbalanced, and it becomes awkward to whirl. That's not the case for Bland Schult, so you do get pretty good weight on him while not being too unbalanced. And on top of that, he has really good support. Um, a card I showed in a pack opening I did on this channel. It was an ability card that is exclusive to Bland Schult, Killer Volca, and Zach Jagard. That essentially just lets you either shoot twice or shoot once, and when you stand, you get to take one of your opponent's 1 gate cards and put it back on the field. So that's really strong. Uh, the thing, the thing that I think is holding Bland Schult, regular Bland Schult back, is that Bland Schult Kai exists, and Bland Schult Kai we're gonna put in A tier. It's just better Bland Schult. It has better G power. It's built in. It has built-in metal, and it's placed in a spot that actually helps it be less unbalanced. So it's less unbalanced, and it's just heavier. Bland Schult Kai is actually really heavy. It's one of the heaviest background in the game. It's right below the Tavs, and it's around the same weight as Made Last Boss, like 25 grams. It's more than Go Garyu even. So yeah, really solid attacker just due to its weight, but also has that card support. I definitely think that Bland Schult Kai deserves to be an A tier. Killer Volca. Kind of talked about support that this guy has as well. Um, the main thing though is that Killer Volca is not as good of a Bakugan as Bland Schult on its own. Um, Really, all Killer Volca has going for it is its 2 cross parts, so you can use it as an use it as an attacker. But I feel like at that point it's doing the bare minimum as an attacker, and that's just I don't know. It's doing the bare minimum to be like a C tier attacker, and it has good support. So maybe like a high C tier, but like I don't know. I don't think it's that good. Uh, Killer Volca Kai, on the other hand, is actually pretty solid. Its built-in metal adds about 3 grams, which is significant, but not enough to make it too unbalanced. So it ends up being pretty heavy, around the weight of a regular Bland Schult. If you build it with Metal Cross. So that's really good. And it can also kind of work for curve shots. So you get some utility out of it. That's kind of nice. On top of that, they changed its mold a bit to make its gimmick work a bit better, but it still barely ever comes up. But it's worth mentioning. Again, higher G power than regular Killer Volca. I don't know. I just feel like it's the same as Killer Volca, just a bit better. Uh, and it still has that same support. So yeah, I feel like it's fair in B tier. You could maybe push to A tier, but I just don't think that Killer Volca Kai quite competes with Blanchult Kai. Zach Jagard, pretty similar situation to Killer Volca. It has access to the exact same support, and the main build you would run with this is just Metal Cross and using it as an attacker. But again, it's kind of an underwhelming attacker, just doing the bare minimum. Um, so yeah, high C tier, but not above that. Card Kai, on the other hand, I'm gonna put a B tier. It's not quite as good of an upgrade as it is as Killer Volca Kai, because the weight added is too much for it to be used as a straight shot attacker anymore. But you can still use it as curve shot utility, and I feel like that's a better role than Zach Jagard anyways, because it wasn't doing much as an attacker to begin with. And it has the higher G power. Yeah. Um, Zach Jagard Kai is also in B tier, but unlike Killer Volca, I don't think there's much of an argument for it to be made A tier. Gren Dragown. This is a strict upgrade over Flare Dragown. It has the same G power. It has the same support mostly. Um, it just has the rails that make it shoot straighter. The thing is, though, I don't think it's enough of an upgrade to put it in A tier, so I'm gonna put it in B tier. Zero Municus, however, I think is a slight downgrade over Destroy Municus. I'm also gonna put it in B tier. Um, the main issue I have with it is its G power. Destroy Municus, how did he say 700 G printing? Well, Zero Municus only has a 600. So you're trading 100 Gs just to like have a slightly better attacker, curve shot attacker, which like might be worth it, but I don't think so. 100 Gs is a lot. So I don't know. It's still close enough to be in B tier, but I don't think it's above Destroy Municus. Uh, Gift Jinryu. Um, I'm gonna put him in C tier. Kind of similar to Killer Vulcan, Zach Jagard. All he's really got going for him as a Bakugan himself is the two cross parts, which can be run as Metal Cross, and then you get a like bare minimum attacker. Um, Gift Ryu also has some good support because it was in the champion deck, which all the cards in that deck are really strong. Um, so yeah, he's pretty much just like these guys. Good support, but a kind of underwhelming Bakugan. Gigantorus is D tier. Um, Gigantorus's whole shtick is being tall, and being tall is not a good thing. Tall Bakugan are just easier to knock over and crit. Uh, as far as tall Bakugan go, Gigantorus does have some support keeping him upright, so he's not like terrible as a tall Bakugan, but it's still not a trait I would like on it. And he has very awkward cross and soul placement that don't give you very good options to run him as like a curve shotter or with a tech. So I don't know. He just kind of ends up being a big target. Um, some redeeming qualities because you can at least run metal on him. So that's keeping him out of F tier. But I don't think he's higher than D tier. Flame Eagle. Uh, this guy is C tier. Um, Kind of similar to these guys. All he's really got going for him is the two cross parts. So he's doing the bare minimum for an attacker to be in C tier. But I would really, what I'm looking for in an attacker is much better cross placement or much better support. Flame Eagle really only has access to generic Pyro support, and yeah, so not great support, and doing kind of the bare minimum for an attacker. So I feel like C tier is fair. G Ganorada is A tier. I did a review on this guy a long time ago, and it was probably the worst review I've ever done on this channel. I kind of called it a hybrid Bakugan, which is definitely not the case. G Ganorada is strictly an attacker. Um, you shoot it sideways, and then it has the two cross parts in optimal position, and you get a really strong attacker that's actually really consistent because you also have the gravity ring preventing it from overshooting. So that's really nice. It also has access to really good support, and it has a 720G printing, which is pretty solid. So definitely A tier. G Ganorada Kai is also going to go in A tier. It's kind of funny because what makes G Ganorada so good is that its crossbars are in an optimal position and it's really well balanced. G Ganorada, which isn't the case for G Ganorada Kai. G Ganorada Kai still has like the crossparts, but it's a bit unbalanced. It's not as unbalanced as you would think looking at it though, because the gravity ring, when you fold it up, it moves up a bit and ends up more in the middle of the Bakugan. But it is still a little unbalanced. The main thing though is that you get an absolutely absurd amount of weight from G Ganorada Kai. I think it's like 14 grams or something. I don't know. It's really big. It's essentially the weight of 4 soul pieces. I G Ganorada Kai with Metal Cross is heavier than the Tavs, and I think that just that heavy of a Bakugan is going to be a solid attacker regardless. So yeah, I'm putting it in A tier. It's not going into S tier simply because there's one Bakugan that's heavier than it, but you know, this is still a solid attacker. Quite good actually. Well, Gallo. This guy's kind of weird. You mainly build him as an attacker with metal cross parts. The thing is that these metal cross parts are in a better position than any of the Bakugan in C tier. So I'm gonna put him in B tier, but it's like a low B tier. He's doing the bare minimum to make it into B tier. Acro Gizzard. I don't think I need to explain it. It's an A tier. This guy is the poster boy for long boys, and high occupancy Bakugan are always really strong. I'm not gonna put him any higher than A tier because he later on he did get a bit outclassed, but he's still super solid. He's got a 720G printing, which is really nice. So yeah, Acro Gizzard is A tier minimum. Borg Mahesis. I'm gonna do Kalukin at the same time, even though Kalukin was released a lot later. These two are essentially the same Bakugan. In previous lists, I put them both in A tier because these two are the best curve shot Bakugan in the game. However, I'm gonna bump them both down to B tier, and the reason why is because I feel like just being good at curve shotting isn't enough. Because there's a lot of Bakugan that can curve shot and may even bring something else to the table. So, for example, Municus line. They're solid curve shot attackers, while also being pretty good at curve shotting. Like they aren't quite as good as these two, but these two are only curve shot. And while that's good for a utility Bakugan, I feel like other Bakugan can fill that role well enough while also doing something else. And I think that's more valuable. So B tier. Rise Dragoon, A tier. Not quite that good. A tier, not S tier. Um, he's about on par with the Gadoradas. Um, he's essentially got one cross part and then one built-in cross part in optimal position. His main appeal over the Gadoradas is that even though he's lower weight, he has better pop out force, which helps with crit KOs. Um, and he has better support because he is a Dragoon. So, pretty solid. 700G printing as well, which is quite solid. Yeah, I feel like these guys are all around the same level. And I kind of mentioned it. Hammer Cannon's also about as good as these guys. He just doesn't have the same level of support or G power. So, yeah, just to give you an idea of how good Hammer Cannon is. Um, Gus Burnan. This is a tough one. I'm gonna put him in D tier. An argument could be made for F tier because he is kind of tall, but I think his pop out force gives him a bit of use as like an underwhelming attacker. I don't know. I just don't feel like he's quite as bad as Mystic Elico, and he's definitely not as bad as these two. So I'm gonna put him. I feel like D tier is fair. He's about on par with a typical Bakugan. Nanani Ghana. For deck filler, this guy's actually kind of good, but still only a C tier. This was like your Pyrus defense option for a while. He's got pretty good occupancy, but at the same time, he's kind of just a big body and only has soul parts. So he wasn't a great occupancy Bakugan. It was just kind of like an option you were forced to use if you wanted to run Mono Pyrus and needed a defender. Nowadays, he's even worse because Pyrus actually has access to a good defense Bakugan with Jigen Dragoon. But like, it's still an option and it's still usable. It's just not great. So I'm gonna put it in C tier. Hollow Municus is very similar to its predecessors. Again, its highest G power printing is 650, which is lower than Destroy Municus, but it is a good bit better in terms of curve shot attacking compared to its predecessors. So I do think Hollow Municus is actually worth running over Zero and Destroy, but I still feel that it's in the same range. I still feel like it's a B tier Bakugan. I feel like they could have done something to extra with Hollow Minicus to make it a bit more incentive to run, like they did with Rise Dragoon. Mika Laurel is a fucking joke. These are one of my favorite Bakugan designs. But all it is a big target, big tall target. So yeah, it's got negative defense, so I'm putting it in F tier. Nana Nigana, that's not right. Shanozichi, is about as close as we get to a typical Bakugan in tech. I'm putting it in D tier because that's essentially where I said typical Bakugan would go. Yeah, nothing too special about this guy. He's just kind of there. Trifalco. All of the modes on Trifalco have some use, so that's kind of nice. You have mode 1, which is little mode. It's a good low occupancy option. Uh, Second mode, cross mode, um, is good for attack, and its third mode, shield mode, is a really solid tank. Actually its best mode. Um, the main problem I have, specifically with the green Trifalco, is its big tumor on the back. It's supposed to be like an additional gimmick where it's easier to line it up with the magnet facing up, but it just gets in the way of rolling. It's super obnoxious. On the other hand, the red Trifalco gets rid of that. So I'm gonna put that one in A tier because I feel like it's the solid tank that Trifalco should be without the downsides. Uh, Shield Leonis. I kind of talked about this guy with Keylon Leonis. He's just a strictly better Keylon Leonis. Instead of getting the built-in metal, it has 3 cross parts, and they're all in a really good position. Again, you could either build it as a attack defense hybrid with full metal, or you could build it as a pure defense tank with full rubber. Um, Either way works. Um, it's just a strict upgrade over Keylon Leonis. It's a lot better. But there are better tanks later on down the line, so I'm not going to put it any higher than A tier. Gravity Gnome. This guy. I don't even know what to do with this guy. I'm going to put Gravity Gnome in C tier. This guy's like a handful of pros and cons, but he's mostly cons. The big thing is that he's really tall, which we've already established isn't a good thing. And he has tumors around him that make him a little hard to roll. They aren't too intrusive, but they are. It is frustrating that they're there. Um, so that's not great. But at the end of the day, it's still a Bakugan with 2 cross, 2 soul. Um, so I guess I guess you can at least use him as a curve shotter. That's a thing, yeah. Um, but still nothing too impressive. Um, so yeah, I think C tier. He's got a good attribute, but it's also very competitive role to run in that attribute. Darkus is not looking for a curve shot Bakugan. They have plenty of those. So, I don't know. Um, I feel like he's more redeemable than Gigantorus, but still not good. So, C tier. Daifujo. Um, Interesting fun fact about Daifujo is its first printing, despite obviously having a cross part, you weren't actually allowed to change it. Every shield deck came with every Daifujo in the shield deck had its cross part glued, and in fact had a sticker over the box to hide that it once had a cross part. So technically, the cross part of Daifujo is not usable unless you're using the black version or any other later version. That's not the blue one. I think the only other version is the black version. I'm not sure. Um, so technically, I should be tiering those separately, but I'm just gonna tier it as if it has the cross part. And either way, it would be an A tier. Um, Typically, we'd want to run rubber cross on it just to increase friction with the card. And while it does have 2 modes, the only mode that's useful is the down mode where it has high occupancy. Yeah, Daifujo is just like a solid occupancy Bakugan for Aquas. And yeah, I definitely think it's A tier. Like he's not quite as he doesn't have quite as much occupancy as um, Acro Gizzard, but he does have the cross part that touches the card that you can increase friction with rubber. So, he's got some pros and cons compared to Acro Gizzard. I don't think he's quite as good, but he's still definitely A tier. Windmill. I'm gonna put Windmill in B tier. Previous list, I put him in A tier because this guy can be an extremely strong attacker. Um, Even better than Hammer Cannon, actually, or most of the guys up here. The problem is just that he's too hard to use. He's a curve shot attacker that you have to shoot in a special way. A typical curve shot attack won't work because the blades will get caught in your fingers. And he doesn't work for straight shots because the blades will mess with your roll. You really have to know how to use Windmill for him to work, and I feel like he's just too hard to use. Um, so and on top of that, Ventus has some solid attackers. So he's not exactly like unique in his role. So I think overall, while he is a really strong attacker, there's no real reason to run him over something that's just easier to play. So I'm putting him in B tier. Tiger Dogma, I'm putting in D tier. I like this thing's gimmick. It's a lot of fun. It's just not very useful. um, he doesn't have much support keeping him from just being knocked over. Um, and his gimmick makes him not round in ball form. So he's hard to roll, and he's not great for defense. Um, like he does have two cross parts, but I don't think that's enough to bring him to C tier, even though that was kind of like the bar for C tier, just because he's not round. I don't know. He's just kind of a bad defense Bakugan that has negative traits on top of that, so I'm putting him in D tier. Dagger Otis, one of the coolest tech designs, not quite the best Bakugan. I'm putting him in B tier. Um, he kind of functions as a attack defense hybrid, like Saint Aquas, but doesn't have access to quite as good support and isn't quite as good as in either of those roles. He just kind of ends up being a middle of the road hybrid Bakugan. Definitely worse than Saint Aquas, but not quite bad enough to be below B tier. So that's where I'm putting him. Pachia Gale is joining our Pyrus attackers in A tier. Essentially the same thing as Rise Dragoon, but he's got even more pop out force, but he trades that for some support and weight. But overall around the same level. Buddha Gil is also going in A tier, but like bordering S tier. This guy's definitely like really high A tier. The thing with Buddha Gil is that he's the most consistent Bakugan, probably, in terms of getting critical KOs, because he has such good range and such good pop out force. Even if he is a curve shot attacker, it really doesn't matter because it's not hard to curve shot attack. You don't need to shoot him in a special way like Windmill. Yeah, he just kind of works. The problem though is that the way he's built kind of makes him awkward to use for critical hits. Whenever your opponent sets up like a strong tank, and you just want to get that off the field, you're not actually going for the critical KO. You're just trying to knock it off. There's definitely better options because like he's a curve shot attacker with no cross, so you're only relying on the soul, and he's not too heavy. And in that case, the pop out force and range doesn't help a whole lot because he's probably just going to stay in ball form. So yeah, really good at critical KOs. Not quite as good at, but he's like kind of underwhelming in crit hits, and I think that's what holds him back. I feel like what I'm looking for in an S tier attacker is a Bakugan that's going to fill every role of an attacker pretty well. So, yeah. Buttigill only fills one role of an attacker. Really. Buttigill Black version is a C tier. This thing is a disaster. Um, it saved from being any lower than C tier because at the end of the day, it still is a Buttigill. It still has the same pop out force and the same range. The problem is that they gave it this metal tail that makes it really awkwardly balanced and generally just hard to use. If they made the neck metal, this thing would be amazing. It'd be S tier minimum. Um, but because they only gave the tail metal, its weight distribution is just screws it all up, and it ends up making a really good Bakugan really bad. So yeah, more metal is not always good. Twin Dobru, C tier. It's a double-sided Bakugan, but the sides are kind of contradictory. Its down mode is more defense-oriented, and its up mode is more attack-oriented. And if you're using it, you're not guaranteed to get the side you want when you want it. Um, but at the end of the day, it still has two cross parts, so it's doing the bare minimum to make it the C tier in terms of an attacker. So I'll give it C tier. The Tavs are both going to go in A tier. I don't think I need to explain these guys. They're just really fucking heavy and can plow through things. Cease Tav is purely Darkus, but has higher G power than Sextav. Sextav has every attribute, so that's like the main difference between them. But they're both really good. Mainly attackers, but they do have some defense, so you can kind of use them as attack defense hybrids. Um, Again, what really keeps them out of S tier is just that there's a couple background that are better. Um, so yeah, yeah, probably around the range of these guys. Maybe a bit better just because of how heavy they are. Um, no, I don't think so because they're around the same weight as Gigana Radakai. So yeah, definitely around the range of the other Pyrus Bakugan in A tier. Uh, Gaga Horus. Also gonna put in A tier. The main thing that Gaga Horse has going for it is that with its gimmick of being able to shift its weight, you can make it a really well balanced, heavy 36mm Pyrus Bakugan, which is all really good. That's gonna alone make it a solid attacker. Um, but it's also pretty good in some bind combinations since the shiftable weights can make otherwise unbalanced combos balanced. So in decks with a lot of bind Bakugan, uh, Gagagaryu gets even more utility. So yeah, A tier attacker with some like extra hidden utility. It's not super relevant, but like it's there. So yeah. Oh yeah, and you can also kind of use it to curve in different ways. It doesn't work super well, but like it's a thing. Go Garyu is going to be our first S tier. This thing is probably the best attacker overall. Um, the main reason I'm not putting in SS, we kind of have to talk about Jigen Dragoon for that. I feel like its attack power isn't like high enough to justify using it over Jigen Dragoon. We'll talk more about that when we get to Jigen Dragoon, but I feel like I'd want even more from an attacker for it to be an SS. Um, so overall, Gogaryu, but overall Gogaryu still really strong. It's a bit unbalanced, but not by too much to ruin it. It's just really heavy. There's a shitload of pop out force. Yeah, S tier easily. So yeah, Warcry D tier. This is just a basic Bakugan. Barely qualifies as tech. Nino Daisho is A tier. The thing with Nino Daisho is that one side is incredibly strong. If Nino Daisho was only its long side, that would be what I'm looking for in an SS tier attacker. It has absolutely absurd range, absolutely absurd pop out force. It doesn't even need the metal, right? It's just that good. The problem is that it has the fucking other side. And the other side is absolutely abysmal. So whenever you shoot this thing, you have a chance at getting a really, really good Bakugan and a chance of getting a bad Bakugan. Um, Previously, I put in C tier, but I feel like you can. I feel like it fits better in A tier. You can kind of like get you can kind of like line it up so you get the side you want more consistently. But it's still important to note that there's a bit of risk to using it. So yeah, I'm putting it in A tier. Tornado, I'm gonna put in C tier. Uh, its gimmick works, but it doesn't really do anything. It just kind of ends up being a big body. The only thing it has really going for it is that it's 36 millimeters, and that's pretty good. Every 36 millimeter Bakugan is gonna be like usable as a tech, so I'm putting it in C tier. I definitely don't think it's gonna be in D tier. Um, Barry Beyond, I'm gonna put in A tier. Barry Beyond is a solid tank Bakugan. The way it works is pretty interesting because its barrier kind of like prevents it from getting hit to begin with, um, rather than just trying to tank hits. Um, but it does come with the downside that it isn't as good at tanking from the sides and back as other tank Bakugan are. Um, but overall, I still think it's really good. 36 millimeters. Yeah, definitely A tier. Jigen Dragown. I've kind of mentioned him a couple of times in this list, but this is the best Bakugan in the game, without question. Um, the thing with Jigen Dragown is just kind of uh, like a toolkit that does everything. Um, the main things are his attack and defense. In the mode you see in this picture with the wings up and head up, that's going to be his main attack mode. Um, and with his wings down and head down, this can be his main defense mode, which is occupancy based. In terms of attack, he's about S tier. He's very similar to Gogaryu, but he doesn't quite. He loses a bit of weight and a bit of pop out force, but at the same time, he's fucking Dragown, and he has Dragown support and a better attribute. Better attributes. Both of these guys got printed in 2 attributes. This guy is Aquas and Ventus, which neither are great attributes. Jigen Dragown is Darkus and Pyrus, which are the 2 best attributes. So he's got access to the 2 best attributes, absurd support, while also being around the same level of attack as Gogaryu. And that's why I don't think Gogaryu quite deserves to be an SS, because you're getting the same amount of attack by running Jigen Dragown, and you're getting a ton of more extra utility with Jigen Dragown. In terms of defense, Jigen Dragown is either like S tier or high A. He's got better occupancy than Acro Gizzard. The main thing though is it's not super consistent. He's not all of his parts open with springs, and the head gets caught on sometimes when it opens. So he's not always going to have like his full occupancy. He's just going to have like, but even then, he's going to have really good occupancy. So I'd say like high A tier defense. He has a 720G base in both Pyrus and Darkus, and the Jigen part has a plus 30 variant. So you can have this guy have a 750 base in either Darkus or Pyrus. So he works pretty well as a G power battler as well. Um, and because of his weight distribution, like he is a bit front heavy, which like isn't great. Um, but it does give him some utility when you shoot him at different angles because he curves. So he's just like utility, defense, G power battles, and attack all in one Bakugan. Um, Not everything he does super well. His main things are attack and defense, but the fact that he also has utility and G power on top of that just makes him an absolutely absurd Bakugan. So yeah, SS easily. Um, yeah. Um, and Glide, fucking C tier. I don't know. It has a similar gimmick to Grendragown, but it doesn't have the same G power, and it doesn't have any cross parts, so it just doesn't. It is just isn't as valuable in this case. But like at least it has some things going for it, so it's not D tier. Let's Go is essentially a Pyrus Destroy Municus. A bit lower G power, but whatever. Um, it has the 2 cross, it has the 2 soul. You can use this thing as a straight shot attacker or curve shot attacker. Doesn't quite have the same support, but I mean, it's still good, I guess. Still around B tier, yeah. Jibafudo, we're gonna put an SS. Um, Jibafudo is the best defense Bakugan in the game. Um, and in the case of Jibafudo, unlike Gogaryu, I actually think that Jibafudo is worth running over Jigen Dragoon, just because it's actually like an improvement in defense over Jigen Dragoon. When it comes to Gogaryu, you're getting just a strict improvement with Jigen Dragoon. Um, I feel like I'm kind of bashing on Gogaryu a lot. This thing's still a fucking amazing Bakugan. Um, it's just that Jigen Dragoon's absurdly broken. But yeah, Jibafudo, the extra magnet, it just makes this thing like the best tank in the game. Um, the Fudo front, um, it's low to the ground mostly. Like it still has like the bind core that's kind of a big body. Like it's low enough to the ground. You can help deflect attacks. So yeah, this guy is just like a massive defense wall. Um, so yeah, definitely the best tank Bakugan and debatably the best defense Bakugan in the game. Um, Sea Slug, I'm gonna put in B tier. It's similar to Bland Schult, but with a better open form and less support. So pros and cons, it's around the same area. Act Gile. This is a weird one. I'm gonna put in C tier. The main thing with Act Gile is that it just has a lot of niche utility. Um, Nothing like too great that would actively seek to use it in a deck, but I wouldn't like complain if I was forced to use it in a deck. It's low occupancy, probably the best low occupancy Bakugan, uh, and in Gachi format specifically, since it's always closed when not standing. Um, you're gonna have like a Bakugan that's always ready to go. You don't have to worry about having to fold up your Bakugan in those 10 seconds. So that's really nice. I just don't feel like either of those things are too valuable. Um, so I'm leaving it in C tier. It is also worth noting that Hackapoid is legal, so Agile isn't the only one that fills that utility. But I do like Agile more, just because it's a bit more round in its ball form. So yeah. We're gonna look at all these guys at the same time. Nagadaja, Yoden Schiffer, and Ozpress are the big trio when it comes to occupancy Bakugan. Um, they're all S tier minimum, and they all kind of have different pros and cons. Ozpress is the most well rounded. It's just a big occupancy Bakugan. Uh, the rubber band's really only there to be flashy. It doesn't work as well as BRE Beyond. But he's just got really good occupancy. Yoden Schiffer has really good occupancy as well, but like where it's distributed isn't as good as Ozpress. However, he has 4 modes, and specifically his mode 1, where he has low occupancy, is pretty useful. And then we have Nagadaja, which has the worst occupancy out of all of them, but is also the best tank. Personally, I think Nagadaja is the best, so I'm going to put in SS. But I could see an argument for either any of these being the best occupancy Bakugan. If you asked me a few years ago, I probably would have done something like that. I think Yoden Schiffer's utility with its modes is quite valuable, but I think over time I valued Nagadaja's ability to tank while having high occupancy to be much more useful, because that's a big issue with um, occupancy Bakugan is oftentimes they can't tank super well, especially from the sides. Nagadaja is probably an even better tank than Jibafudo from specifically head on. And from the sides, it's better than most occupancy Bakugan and around like a regular tank level. So, yeah. Nagadaja, I think, is my favorite high occupancy Bakugan. So, I'm putting in an S test. I'm going to leave these guys in S tier. But, like, if you wanted to say do that or do that, like, I wouldn't question it, right? I just feel like Nagadaja is the favorite, in my opinion. I just don't want to put them all up there because I don't want to make SS too crowded. I'm trying to be pretty strict with it, so only the best occupancy Bakugan. Sanzu Hollow Boss, S tier. I like Gogaryu a bit more, but I still feel like Sanzu Hollow Boss deserves to be an S tier. The main thing with Sanzu Hollow Boss is its weight. This is the heaviest Bakugan in the game. But it doesn't quite have as much pop-out force as Gogaryu, which is the main reason I like Gogaryu more. But this is still a really, really solid attacker. Overall, just run Jig and Dragoon. What is this thing's name? Oh my god. Co-Tanker, that's right. Co-Tanker's gimmick does nothing, but it does have 2 cross parts. So, C tier does the bare minimum. Ken Panzer's kind of the same. It's going to be a high C tier because its cross parts are in a bit better position than the rest of these guys here, but not quite like as good as Well Gallo. Definitely an upgrade over Grand Panzer because it's lower to the ground and harder to knock over, but still not an amazing Bakugan. So I'm leaving it in C tier. Ogre Leonis kind of fits into the rest of the Leonis line, where it can kind of work as an attacker or a defense Bakugan. But Ogre Leonis is, instead of having multiple ways to build it, it's strictly an attack defense hybrid. My main problem with it is that it can't tank hits very well from head on, only from like the sides, but it's not like a big deal. You can shoot it sideways and such. And shooting it head on, it is a pretty decent attacker. I mean, it's got good metal placement, and it's 36 millimeters, so yeah, pretty good. Um, on the other hand, Lashao Falco is the worst bind Bakugan, and it looks really cool, and I really like the Falco line, so I feel bad, but I have to put it in C tier. Lashao is the worst bind part for the back. Um, its main thing is that it's supposed to be really light, so that when it's combined with Lashao Falco, you can shoot it at different angles and it'll curve. The thing is, though, that both Zetamunicus and Jigendragown both do that already while doing a lot more. So there's nothing really going for Lashao Falco. But yeah, Lashao is just a worse Jigen. Like I said, it's really light. Falco doesn't really have any attack or defense power. It's just kind of a big body to KO. It's got some weight. It works with some bind combinations, but I don't know. Not great on its own. So yeah, I feel like C tier is really the highest I can give this thing. I don't know. Maybe you could argue B tier because it is 36 millimeter Falco, but I don't know. No, I think C tier is where it has to stay. Uh, C tier, Goon Icarus. That's the right name. All it really has going for it is its cross parts. It has two modes, neither of which are useful. So, whatever. But I mean, it has the cross parts, so doing the bare minimum for a C tier attacker. Zetamunicus. Oh boy. In previous lists, I put this guy in SS, and I'm actually gonna bump it down to S. The thing with Zetamunicus is when it was released, it was pretty much game breaking. Um, no other Bakugan at the time was really built for G power battles, so Zetamunicus just kind of like dominated its own little niche, and nothing could compete with it. But as time went on, we got a lot more. It got put in check pretty hard. The Friendship Bind set, while it did give a buff to Municus, it also gave an even bigger buff to Dragown, or Jigen. Um, so Jigen Dragown can compete with Zetamunicus. Even Jigen Municus can compete with Zetamunicus. And the Armors line. A lot of the Armors Bakugan are built around G power battles, and they can do really well against Zetamunicus. Zetamunicus just isn't as dominant as it used to be, and I'd hardly call it the best G power battler anymore. But I still think it's a really solid Bakugan because it isn't just G power battles, right? It is like an A tier attacker. Um, you do get some utility out of it because it can curve pretty easily. Um, so yeah, Zetamunicus I feel like still deserves to be an S tier, but it's not for the same reason. It's just like because it's a good Bakugan that can G power battle as well. So yeah. Oh, and it also is worth noting that Zetamunicus is a bind Bakugan, so in decks with other bind system Bakugan, you can swap Zeta with a lot of other parts, and then you can make other attribute Bakugan G power battlers. So that's also some extra utility that is actually really relevant for Zetamunicus because a lot of bind system Bakugan are really strong. So yeah, S tier. I don't think it's worth putting an SS tier anymore because it's not dominating G power battles anymore. It's just like another piece that's good in G power battles. Made Last Boss. Made Last Boss is high A tier. Um, it's very similar to Gaga Horus, where the main thing it has going for it is that it's a 36 millimeter Pyrus Bakugan that's got good weight. and is really well balanced. Made Last Boss is actually one of the heaviest Bakugan in the game. It's heavier than Go Garyu even, but it's a bit below the Tavs. Um, yeah, it's still a really solid attacker. And its gimmick works really well with utility, so you get some good utility out of it. Yeah, I don't think it's quite on par with Hollow Boss or Garyu, so it's not going in S tier, but it's definitely high A tier. Bujin Dragoon. This one's kind of hard to rank. Um, because it's strict. Bujin is a very defensive part. Um, it's pretty much so you're pretty much dedicating Dragoon to be a defensive piece, which isn't always a bad option. We'll talk about another combination where it's a good option. Um, but in the case of Bujin Dragoon, I feel like Bujin's too underwhelming and not worth it. Um, but at the end of the day, it's still a 36 millimeter Pyrus background with the name Dragoon. So it's gonna be pretty good. So I'm gonna put it in B tier. You can make an argument for A tier, but I don't know. I just don't like Bujin on this thing. Go Dragoon. Ugh. Okay. Just to clarify, Go Dragoon is the Go Dragoon we're ranking here is the plastic version. If it was the regular uh, Go Dragoon combo, it would be an S tier attacker. However, the plastic version, it's either B or C tier. I'm gonna put it in B tier. It's I don't know. I mean, the main appeal of Go is its weight, so you completely lose that for 20 Gs, which also isn't worth it because you could just run Jigen for 30 Gs. So I don't know about that. And I mean, Dragoon is still going to be a good part, regardless of it whether it has metal or not. Um, but it's definitely not helping that it loses the metal. The reason it's going in B tier though is because that's essentially the floor for what a 36 millimeter Dragoon can be at, right? Like it's still gonna be decent attack wise, and it's still gonna have a good name and access to good support. So I don't know. I feel like B tier is fair because it kind of makes it a B tier off the same justification as Flare Dragoon, right? So I don't know. Low B tier. Uh, Gaga Garyu is kind of the same. Um, sure, you lose all the weight, and that's a big part of what makes Garyu good. In fact, that's all that makes Gaga go good. So Plastic Gaga Garyu, it's a big nerf over a regular Gaga Garyu. I'd say a regular Gaga Garyu is like A tier, maybe yeah. Gaga Garyu with metal parts would be A tier. The plastic one, however, um, I mean, it's still got this pop out force from Garyu. It's still going to be a pretty solid attacker. Like it's still 36 millimeters, so I'm going to put it in B tier. Ooh, the God 3 deck. Um, Go Fudo is C tier. This is about as contradictory as of parts as you can get. Fudo is strictly defense. Go is strictly offense, and together they make something that's bad at both. Um, but regardless, it's still a 36 millimeter Bakugan, so it can't really go below C tier. Uh, Jiba Dragoon is gonna go in SS tier. Um, it is a pure defense option for Dragoon, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Because Dragoon is debatably the best front for defense. It's either Jiba or Dragoon. It's really just preference. Dragoon is more defense oriented, not defense, occupancy oriented, while Fudo is more tank oriented. But they both work really well with Jiba, and yeah, Yeah, so definitely think both of these guys deserve to be an SS. Just because they're mainly the same thing, just a preference issue. Um, so yeah. Jigen Garyu, that's gonna go in A tier. Like, right, it's still gonna be good. Um, it's just that Jigen is more useful in on combos that can make use of both its attack and defense modes, which is pretty much just Dragoon. Um, when it comes to Garyu, it's purely attack, and I'd rather just have Go in that case. Um, but at the end of the day, like, it's still going to be a good Bakugan. It's still going to have good weight. It's still going to have good pop out force. And Jigen is going to give it plus 30 Gs, so that's nice to have as well. Um, yeah. Overall, not quite as good as Go Dragoon, just like still a really solid attacker though. All right, we're in the final stretch. Armor's Bakugan. These guys are all kind of weird because they all kind of suck as Bakugan themselves. Um, but they all have really good G power, and the armor's abilities, if they're really good, can still make an otherwise bad Bakugan like really fucking good. So yeah. Starting with Rekahiryu, I'm gonna put him in A tier. Rekahiryu is like a C tier attacker on its own, which isn't anything notable compared to all these guys, but compared to the Armor's Bakugan, that's actually quite solid. But the main thing it has going for it is its skill. Rekihiryu's skill is plus 100, which means in G power battles it gets an extra 100 Gs. It's kind of hard to talk about why plus 100 is good when we haven't looked at any of the other Armor's Bakugan yet. But to really understand, pretty much any other Armor's Bakugan that's built to win G power battles um, is reliant on gate cards. And while that can be really rewarding, because a lot of gate cards will give like 300 to single attribute, nothing to everything else. So if you can get that bonus twice, or even just snag that bonus, it's going to be really rewarding, even better than Rekihiryu's plus 100. Um, but in the case of Rekahiryu, um, well, in the case of those Bakugan, um, you can your opponent can kind of play gate cards to play around them. Like silver gate cards that give 0 to everything are extremely popular, and skills that are gate card oriented in that case just aren't going to do anything. And that's what makes Rekahiryu skills so good. Is plus 100 is always going to be useful. Um, like unless you're going into a low G power wins battle, plus 100 is either going to give you like free wins essentially on your own gate cards, or you're going into your opponent's gate card with an 850 base, which is really solid, and you're going to have that even if they're going to get a massive boost from their gate card, you're going to be closing that gap at least by a bit. So its main thing is its consistency compared to other skills, but I do believe there is one um, battle oriented skill that is better than it, and we will get to that when we get to Yasha Tagaris. Oh boy, Shibuzeku is going in C tier. This is arguably the worst Armor's Bakugan in the game. There's one other candidate, which we'll get to in a bit, but it's either Shibuzeku or, we'll talk about it when we get to it. Shibuzeku has a couple of problems. One is his G power. He has the lowest G power out of any Armor's Bakugan. Every other Armor's Bakugan has at least 750 as their highest G power printing, and potentially even more. Shibuzeku's highest G power printing is 740, and while 10 Gs doesn't sound like a lot, that is the difference between going into a battle with a higher base than Zetamunicus half the time and a tie with Zetamunicus half the time. So that actually is quite relevant. On top of that, his skill is not that good. It's one of the worst. It's not quite the worst. Plus wind lets you get the Ventus attribute bonus from the gate card, which is, very rarely ever going to be relevant. Like, it's going to work on your own gate cards, but in that case, it's going to be a win more situation because um, you already have advantage on your own gate cards, right? It can be used in tandem with other armors Bakugan. Um, so like you can run it on. You could do something like Shippu, Hado Kaio, and then you can get type coverage for both Ventus and Aquas. So it is kind of relevant for type coverage, and that's specifically why it's not the worst um, skill. But like it's still not great. Um, but like it can be useful. Besides that, Shibuzeku is just like a terrible Bakugan on its own. No attack, no defense, no occupancy, nothing really going for it. Um, at the end of the day, though, it's still going to be C tier because even if its skill is bad, it's better to have a skill than not have a skill. Like gaining the Ventus attribute bonus is still a good thing. Like I wouldn't not want that. Um, and it does have 740 base, which like I said isn't quite as high as I would like it to be, but that's still like a really high G power. Like that's beating most of this list. So, it has some redeeming qualities, so I'm putting it in C tier. Hado Kaio is A tier. In previous lists, I put this guy lower, but that was when I was under the impression that armor's abilities were only once per game. Uh, Now that they know that you can activate them whenever they're applicable, this guy is a lot more broken. Uh, Hadokaio's skill Blow Away makes it so that when you stand, you can return one of your opponent's standing Bakugan to their hand. Which is not the description the wiki has. The wiki's actually wrong about this Bakugan skill. Um, Whatever. Um, but yeah, that's like really, really strong. Like you now can just bypass your opponent's like heavy tank Bakugan, not having to worry about trying to crit hit it. You can just get a stand, and then boom, get rid of it. You can run a deck with 3 of these things, and just like be a massive troll, and make it so your opponent's really hard. Makes it really hard for your opponent to stand. Um, Obviously, that strategy isn't perfect. Like there's still things they can do. They just have to play very awkwardly. But like the only other Bakugan I can think of that's like actually super good, and with it in a deck of 3 copies of itself is Jigen Dragoon. Um, Hadokaio. So yeah, Hadokaio has debatably the best skill in the game. It really depends on how much you value um, G power battles, but I don't know. I think the real thing that's holding Hadokaio back from being an S tier is that it's a bad Bakugan on its own, and that its attribute isn't great. Like it's working with Aquas, which is a mid tier element attribute, whatever. Um, yeah, it's purely carried by its insane skill and its 750 base G power. So yeah, Iki Tozen is the other candidate for the worst armors Bakugan. Um, let's start with the skill. Times 2 is the worst skill that any armors Bakugan can have. Like it's still useful, but the main problem is that it essentially. Okay, what times 2 does is you get your gate attribute bonus twice. Should have mentioned that. But the main problem with it is that it can't be used as type coverage on other Bakugan. So it's only ever a win more ability and never something you run in a deck to try to get your opponent's attribute bonus. So, like, again, it's still helpful. If you're going in a Chaos Mirror match, that'll work. It'll be pretty useful. But other than that, it's not a great skill. Um, the Tozen core is essentially a reskinned Hiryu core, neither of which are very useful. Um, so there's that. And its attribute arm, it gives Chaos, but we have another Chaos Armor's Bakugan, and that thing's skill and attribute arm are actually good for attack. So there's not a good option. There's not a good reason to run Iki. There's some scenarios where I'd like the Iki attribute arm, but there's few and far between. The big issue with Iki Tozen is just that all of its parts are bad. At least with Shibuzeku, like there's some scenarios where plus wind is like when it comes to Shibuzeku, at least plus wind is to better than times two. Other than that, these guys are both just bad Bakugan with bad skills, and good G power at least. So they're both in C tier. That's like the floor for Armor's Bakugan, but um, everything's gonna be better than them. Ogon Ho-Oh. This guy I'm putting in B tier. This is the best attacker in terms of Armor's Bakugan, which isn't saying much because he's still only like a C tier attacker. But the fact that he has a skill to begin with and a high G power on top of being a C tier attacker is enough, I think, to bump him up to B tier. His skill isn't great. It's plus light, which is essentially the same as plus wind, but you get the chaos attribute. It's just as bad, but like at least it's a good Bakugan on its own. Not a good Bakugan. It's at least a okay Bakugan on its own, unlike these guys. So I'm putting it in B tier. Kappa Kutaku. I'm gonna put in A tier. This is the only Armor's Bakugan that I actually think is a good Bakugan on its own. It's essentially just a tank. It's about on par with Kilon Leonis, but its skill works really well in tandem with being a tank. O-Raid lets you move a gate card that it stands on to any other spot in the field that's connected to another gate card. So there's a lot you can do with that. You could like move it behind another gate card so that it's harder for your opponent to attack Kapakutaku. You can move it really close to you, so it's easy to get a double stand. You can move it in front of one of your own Bakugan, so you have like, so it's like blocked and your opponent can't crit it easily. Yeah, there's just a lot of good utility that works with O-Raid, that O-Raid has, that works with a tank like Kapakutaku. So I feel like he's pretty much an A tier. And the last Armor's Bakugan and the last Bakugan for this list, Yasha Tagaris. I'm gonna put in S tier. Yasha Tagaris, I believe, is the best Armor's Bakugan, followed by Kapakutaku, then Rekahiryu, then not Kapakutaku, Hadokayo, then Rekahiryu, then Kapakutaku, blah, blah, blah. Okay. The main thing with the Yasha Tagaris is, yes, it is a bad Bakugan on its own, but it's the undisputed king of G power battles. For starters, it has a 770 base, which is really high, right? Like that's the highest G power printed on any Bakugan in Japan. Um, Oops, that's too much. Here we go. On top of that, it has probably the best skill in the game. Um, Debatably, blow away is better, but they serve different purposes. Um, Yashitagaris' skill is free select, which just lets you choose any attribute on a gate card during a battle, and you gain that attribute bonus. So strictly upgrade over plus light, plus wind, and times two. Um, it essentially just insta wins you battles. On your own gate cards, you insta win. Especially in Gachi, like there's no way you can beat this thing on your own gate card. There's no way your opponent can beat this thing on your own gate card in Gachi, and on your opponent's gate card, you can just choose their attribute bonus, and unless they have something higher than 770, which considering the cap is 800, there's not a lot of options. Um, they're gonna have a hard time beating this thing. On top of that, it has Darkest, which is the best attribute in the game. Um, it's just so good. I'm keeping it out of SS because I feel like it's about on par with Zetamunicus, just because while Zetamunicus isn't quite as good of a Bakugan in terms of G power battles, Zetamunicus also has better utility because it's an A tier attacker, at least. It can curve a lot better, and you can give Zeta to other bind system Bakugan to make other attributes your G power battler. Which is kind of true for Yashitagaris. Like you can give free select to other armors Bakugan, but since armors Bakugan are generally kind of bad in terms of being Bakugan themselves, you don't tend to run multiple of them in a deck, so that's not as useful. But all that out of the way, it's still the best G power battler in the game, bar none. Free select is just absurd, and the 770 base is just ridiculous. Yeah, very hard to beat, even even on your opponent's back gate card. This thing's like pretty likely to win. It's winning 90% of your G power battles. So yeah, I feel like S tier is fair. Yeah. I think that's everything. Um, I'm pretty satisfied with this list. Um, yeah. I don't know. I was kind of going for a good distribution, with B being the most full, followed by A and C, S, D, and SS and F. Kind of going for a bell curve. I think I did pretty well. Um, and I'm pretty comfortable with most of these positions. Obviously, like there's some that are pushing it. Like this could go either way. I talked about these guys; those can all go either way. But I think this is what I'm sticking with. So that's it for this video. See you guys in like another 2 years or whatever.